Okay, yes, we are live. So welcome everyone to our April Public Philosophy Talk. These talks are hosted by Loyola University Chicago MAP chapter. MAP stands for Minorities in Philosophy and is an international organization that aims to address structural injustices in academic philosophy and remove barriers that impede participation for members of traditionally marginalized groups. In this public philosophy talk series, LUC MAP members interview philosophers in different stages of their career, undergraduate and graduate study, teaching, research, or working outside of academia in applied philosophy fields. My name is Gina Lebkuecher. I'm a MAP graduate organizer at Loyola. We're being supported behind the scenes today by my fellow MAP grad organizer, Renee Ramirez.
Yeah, I'm Renee. Yeah, and I'm mostly going to be disappearing in a second, so I'll just do that now.
Okay, and I'm interviewing Dr. Jean Clifford. The topic of today's interview will be Jean's research in Greek philosophy of soul, her experience applying philosophy skills outside of academic philosophy, and how philosophy informs her life now that she's a doctor of philosophy. So we invite all of you to join the conversation with any questions or comments for Jean in the YouTube live chat. And Jean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Jean Clifford, like Gina said. She, her pronouns. I grew up in the great state of Minnesota, Minneapolis in particular. I did my undergrad at St. Norbert College, which is a small liberal arts school in De Pere, Wisconsin, right outside Green Bay. I did my PhD at Loyola in Chicago. Like we mentioned, my main area of research is ancient Greek philosophy, specifically interested in morality and psychology, and with an eye towards education and soul development or something. I suppose I could just say development. And currently, what am I doing now? Currently, I work at Chamberlain University, which is a health professional care college. It focuses mainly on nursing degrees, so students who are getting their registered nursing degree or their bachelor's of nursing or master's. And I'm a clinical coordinator, so I assist them in finding health facilities where they can do their clinical hours, which is like a residency for nurses.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much, Jean, for being with us today. So it sounds like the work you're doing now is within academia, but not strictly philosophy related. So I'm wondering what kind of skills from your philosophy degree do you see informing your work now at Chamberlain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say the biggest, the skill that is the most useful in transitioning out of a clearly labeled philosophy category of activity into something else is the ability to communicate ideas to others. And the kind of work you do at the front end of that task, where you take in the information on your own and you have to kind of like deconstruct it and reorganize it into your own brain so it makes sense to you, and then translate that to somebody else and be prepared for it not to work and have to do it again, as well as interact with follow-up questions that maybe you aren't prepared for. While it sounds maybe not philosophical when described in that way, it is quite amazing how, in my experience doing philosophy and in my experience leaving philosophy, that particular cognitive skill has consistently been like making anything successful. I shouldn't say, not like it makes everything successful. When I am successful, it is because I have figured out how to apply that skill to what I am doing.
Cool. Yeah, no, that definitely sounds philosophical to me. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, clear communication, but also knowing what questions to ask, knowing how to draw these kinds of connections. I can see how that, yeah, is super useful and probably would be useful in almost any job.
Yeah, it turns out it's it turns out philosophical skills are actually highly transferable.
That's great. So why, if you don't mind me asking, so when did you decide to start looking for work outside of, the kind of traditional teaching or research philosophy path, and what kind of informed your decision on that?
I started thinking about, what do we call it? Alternative academic careers while I was still in graduate school, but I didn't start any process while in graduate school. So I just paid attention to anytime there were events or lectures or workshops or guests who are going to come in and to talk about how they experienced leaving philosophy or leaving academia and what they did and the kinds of work that they've done and how they whatever networked and job searched and ladder climbed, whatever that process was. I took in a lot of information but didn't do anything with it until I was finished with the dissertation. I now understand myself as a person who does struggle to sort of manage very different projects at the same time. And so it was easy for me to do, it was one thing for me to do with my dissertation while teaching. But the idea, anytime I tried to carve out also thinking about a whole other sort of sector of industry, I found overwhelming and impossible. But when I graduated, I graduated in 2019 and initially set about thinking I would do about 3 years on the job market. I was going to give myself 3 years to get a regular academic job. And then the pandemic happened relatively quickly after that. And I just had to reckon with the very material need I had to make money and start building a life as I was already in my mid-30s and the idea of being paid adjunct wages for another 3 years before I even could possibly think about making more, or just working constantly to make enough money. That reality felt too unstable, too insecure, as well as there is a general trend in academia moving towards contingent labor. So the longer I am looking for work, we are really, the longer I look for work, I'm also dealing with increasing odds of universities not hiring people for full-time positions, but instead turning to contingent labor. And I knew that I didn't want to be adjuncting in perpetuitum. It was hard enough to do it for the 3 years that I did it. So there was really a two-pillared choice of needing stable income as soon as possible, as well as a trend I saw within academia that I did not want to get stuck in or be participating or complicit in. So I had to go.
Yeah. It's I totally get where you're coming from. It's something that I think a lot of graduate students or people considering graduate study in philosophy, or honestly, many academic fields have to struggle with. Like you said, this move towards contingent labor. And I know, of course, that when you were a grad student, you were heavily involved in the grad student union. And that's one tact, right?
Right.
Of course. But I'm wondering, not to like turn this into a depressing turn, but yeah. So I wonder what insights you might have based on your decision to leave the field because of the changing nature of academia. For any of us who are still in grad study or still considering grad study, like how do you see this trend continuing, or how do you see grad students maybe preparing for this reality?
Right. So it is challenging, I think, because to answer the second part of your question first, when it comes to preparing, like I said, in my case, while in a PhD program, even with a department that wanted to help students explore alternative academic careers, I had tremendous difficulty, not just getting over the potential lost dream, if you will, the sort of what can be framed as admitting defeat. And I had to do a great deal of work reframing my choice for myself to be happy about it, which is strange, but true. I had to do that. And so preparing for it is challenging, simply because if you're moving through graduate school with the desire to be a professor, preparing to be not a professor can be cognitively challenging, simply from, why am I spending time on something that I don't want to do, as just a simple way to say it. However, what I think can be done, regardless of how supportive your department or university is or how intense your dreams are, is practicing an open mind, practicing a kind of humility about you, a particular person trying to chart a course within a system that is funneling you funneling you into a harmful position. And knowing that that's the system you're operating in, while not giving up on your dreams of obtaining a sweet tenured position, still being able to maintain an open mind about how you can move through the system differently and end up somewhere else that's also cool and fun. And to be clear, I'm not yet in an ended up place. I currently have a non-teaching job within academia that is rewarding some days and excruciating others, but it's also is a 9-to-5 job. And I think that that's part of having to structure your output into the capitalist work week. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're going to get rewards today from your work, you have to do it or you might lose your job. So just in terms of preparing, I will say this, there's a lot of concrete advice. I found concrete advice useless until I could do that internal work for myself about understanding how I am participating in a system that is designed to funnel me in a particular direction. And I have to learn how to swim upstream or around stream or down the tiny creek instead, because this path just leads to the factory of contingent work in academia right now. But that tangent led me to forget what the first part of the question was.
No worries. That's all really interesting, and you've given a lot to think about. And I have kind of two questions from that. So first of all, you mentioned, so I'll give you both and you can choose which one to answer.
Thank you. I love choices.
So you mentioned that, you've moved from academia, from graduate work in philosophy, where it's a lot of lots of different projects that I totally empathize with you about, like not being able to figure out how to divide your time between dissertating, teaching, trying to like prepare for a job when you're done. Like it is really difficult and time consuming, and the boundaries are often blurred.
Right.
And now you've got a 9-to-5 job. So I'd be interested to hear, that's kind of question one, your thoughts on this kind of more, I don't know, traditional, 9-to-5 office job, although you're working remotely, I think, right?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever a post-COVID,
whatever that means. Yeah.
or in the midst of COVID office job looks like, and how that compares to academia, for those, again, who may be trying to weigh their own options here, knowing, of course, that going the academic route is difficult. And then the other thing I wanted to pick up on is the kind of theme of today's talk. One of the themes is charting your own course, which you've mentioned several times in, trying to fight, sometimes fight the current, right? To chart your own course. And I'm wondering how that relates to the topic of your philosophical study around, because it makes me think about, these kinds of ancient Greek concepts of eudaimonia and developing the virtues. So whichever of those questions you find interesting.
Yeah, well, I love both of those questions. So I think I'll start with the first one, your question about how the kind of 9-to-5 work week schedule. I guess the question was, how does this relate / differ from how I worked while in academia, and maybe similarities and differences and pros and cons kind of assessment. So for me, there were parts about the academic lifestyle that I thrived in. I relished in being able to make my own schedule, even when that meant making terrible choices about it. It really was I was so broke, but it was so nice to just on a Tuesday go to the grocery store at noon or go to the bar at 3, and on a Monday stay up until 2 a.m. working. I mean, there is, as hard as it was and as unstable as that lifestyle was in my 20s, it was a really liberating experience. I did about a year and a half at a 9-to-5 before I came to graduate school, And while, again, not terrible, there was a tremendous amount of limitation on my life during that period. Some of it I opted into. I was also on this like insane quest to be totally frank, to shed 100 pounds. And I now regret a lot of the choices I made on that quest, including how much of my life I let be consumed by that for an entire year in my 20s before I went to graduate school. Like, what a year that could have been. Anyway, but so the freedom of graduate school and the schedule is it's very helpful to figuring out who you are, figuring out what works for you. And in the end, for me, figuring out what doesn't work, which is me being responsible for not just what are the things I do with my time, but how my time is structured and how all of the things, whether they're responsibilities or leisurely activities, fall into the same kind of space of executive functioning. By the time I got the job I finally have, it's difficult to explain how tired I was of having to be in charge of literally every moment of my life. And I know that to some people that probably sounds like a dream. It was not. I don't know. For me, it was absolutely not. I know my depression interacted with the open-ended schedule in a way that became no prescription was going to fix it. Prescriptions helped, absolutely. I needed them for sure to be able to start making changes. But anyway, so that piece is very real. The 9 to 5, and that's not my actual schedule. I actually work 7 to 4, which has its own beauty to it, even though the mornings are terrible. That having a job where the stakes are decently high, that you have to show up, and then you have to do all of your work before 4, because you can't work anymore because in my case, I'm still hourly. I do get paid decently well, but I am still paid hourly. It is exhausting. I don't like having to work, you're like having to engage constantly all day because there's so much to do that I need to get done before, and I need to get it done this week. That is tiring and draining in its own way. However, it is true that at 4 o'clock, I can stop thinking about it. And if I didn't get it done, I need about 15 minutes to a half hour to kind of get to the space of like, oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. And I will, because I'll show up tomorrow because I have to keep my job. And I'll do it when I have to show up because I will have shown up. And that was something that in graduate school, the longer that I had to be the one showing up every day, and I was the only reason I had to show up. And if I didn't show up, I was only letting myself down. It just got harder and harder. I would go to bed not only sad I didn't do something that day, but genuinely concerned I wouldn't do it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And not knowing if I would, really not knowing if I would, even if I had the whole day free or a plan. So to me, while exhausting in a way that everybody who works the schedule does understand, there is a very real benefit for the way that my psychology works. It's really quite a relief to have this schedule where it requires that I show up because that's how I keep my job, requires that I do my work while I'm there because I can't do it later. I can't do it later if I decide to go to the grocery store now and work till 2 a.m. That's not an option. Mm-hmm. And so then I do it. Great. That's what I've only ever wanted that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that resonates with you or with anybody watching, but that was something that I didn't know would be a benefit so much. I mean, in the end, I anticipated it was going to be, but it took, 9 years in academia for me to fully understand why I was so tired all the time. And it was because my executive functioning was just on hyperdrive and screaming to slow down.
Yeah, no, it definitely resonates. I can relate. I'm sure there are a lot of grads out there who can. It is, like you said, in some ways it's very liberating to be able to work when you can or when you feel like it, but the problem is, right, having to make those kinds of decisions, having to set that kind of schedule and deadlines for yourself, it does get really exhausting, and especially when it feels like a lot of the tasks you're asked to do are so nebulous or so large that it's like hard to feel like you're making progress sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have had a question from the chat. So Brandon asks, how do you get yourself to continue looking for an end up place or job while participating in 9 to 5, or in your case, 7 to 4 job?
That is a great question. It is a big challenge. To be frank, I am doing 2 things at the same time. One of them is just, it's like reminding myself daily, even though I am tired and drained, this is not the job I want to stay at. And I use a number of mantras these days, but when it comes to this part, the mantra that I've been using that I think has been the most successful, while it might sound bleak, it does help me anyway, is the mantra that no one is coming. So I am the only one that will find the job I want and will apply for it and will do it. I do have fantasies of being saved, of having some recruiter pop up in my email and be like, we want to hire you now. And being like, yes, whatever, I love it. But that doesn't happen. and even if it did, it is not how I should be structuring the efforts to get out of the position I am in, or to be pursuing development of my career towards more meaningful work. So I also really shrink my my tasks at a time. It took me a long time to learn how to really just reduce my expectations of what I will do in a given day or in a given week. I am a slow transitioner, I have learned, and it is okay. So I might be ready to leave a position much sooner than I will be ready to start looking for a new position. That's okay too. I am capable of doing things that I don't particularly want to be doing or whatever forever. And the job I currently have is, like I said, it is rewarding in a number of meaningful ways. I still get to interact with students and support them through a really difficult time in their academic career. And I sow all kinds of fruit from that experience. I am looking for an institution that not only lets me serve students or serve folks in a meaningful way through something that's hard and challenging for them, but then also provides me with something additional than I am currently getting. And I do, well, anyway, so there's the sort of general overall arc of career development that I'm starting to take more seriously as a young adult, or I don't know, maybe I'm a middle adult, I'm not sure. That these things that I just didn't take seriously when I was in my 20s, because I was like, we need professional development. I'm just going to stay in graduate school until I'm a teacher. This isn't confusing. I know exactly what that means. And now it's like, oh, I don't know what my future role will be at all. And so I spend my time, small chunks, half hour here and there at the end of the workday, maybe a couple hours, 2 weekends a month. I am very much in the mindset these days of prioritizing nothingness and do nothingness as much as prioritizing, get your butt in the seat and work on whatever it is that you're trying to do. So that's the big thing for me, was just figuring out, all right, what is an amount that I can actually achieve? Jean, what is an amount that Jean can achieve? I don't care what anybody else does. I had to learn. Eventually, if we get to talking about advice for applying to schools, it's the same story there. I just had to, like, people applying to 100 schools, people applying to 100 jobs. I don't understand. How do you do it? I don't know. I've never been able to get to anywhere close to that number. So, yeah, so a big part of it for me is just really, really trying to pay attention to what can I do? What rate have I been successful at in the past? And how can I just learn to accept that this is a good rate then? It doesn't have to be faster than it is. The pace it is fine. Yeah, that's a good question, Brandon.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've learned a lot about yourself in your time in grad school and just following. So that's really, yeah, I really admire the fact that, like, you've come to understand your own, psychology, your own kind of needs, and are able to be kind with yourself and set reasonable expectations and stuff like that. So yeah, we do actually have another question from the chat. So this one is, was your experience from as an adjunct helpful for finding alt academic jobs, or did you just take it because you needed the money? Are these kind of adjunct jobs at all helpful for resume experiences or connections?
Yeah, I will say they are absolutely helpful for resume experience. You, like a lot of experience, there's like, I've learned since, let me be clear, I did not know this when I started trying to apply for jobs outside of academia, but I have since learned there's a couple of times, like amount of time in a job, that matter to companies and employers who are looking for new workers. It's like there's a 6-month benchmark, there's a year benchmark, there's a 3 to 5 year benchmark, and then there's a 10+ year benchmark. And that amount of time means, those chunks of time mean something to people looking to hire. And adjuncting can be challenging because it's like, if you only adjunct for 1 semester, maybe that's 3-4 months, or maybe but anyway, so it's not as though you need to adjunct like a machine. That can be valuable for you personally, and as far as transferring adjuncts, the skills you learn by teaching and the grit you develop if you have to adjunct for a really long time. But as far as what is actually, I think, valuable for the resume bit is just teaching experience, right? And unless, I mean, so if you're in that sort of like 6 months to 3 + 5 years window, that is really valuable to people outside of academia. If you are just, just organizing your experience in terms of the teaching bits. It turns out that teaching is a highly transferable skill. And everybody loves having people on their team who can help train, help clarify, ask good questions, figure out which questions aren't good. Like and if you have taught, it's very easy to demonstrate that you have these kinds of interpersonal educational skills. Bonus, if you've taught in the 21st century, you probably also have some technical skills that you can call on in your resume as well. And outside of academia, they do not recognize the difference between whether you taught as a graduate student or taught as an adjunct instructor or taught as a full-time 1-year visiting fellowship. Outside of academia, that distinction doesn't mean anything. You, the person, almost have certainly internalized some kind of value difference, even though there's not one. But the people looking at your resume don't. They will be sad to hear you did something for $2,000 that somebody else gets paid $8,000 for. They'll be sad to hear that, but they don't. And I will say this, it can be strategic to be a little cagey about the wages, because some people do still have prejudice about, once they learn that adjuncts get paid less, unless they have already done a lot of work on themselves to not jump to the next conclusion. A lot of people just then assume that means something about the job or the person, which is, all of us who do that know that's not true. Not that you have to lie, I don't mean that, but you're just, sometimes you talk about wages with others and sometimes you don't. As far as the experience on the resume, it's highly valuable, I have learned. Easily, it's the thing when I talk to folks about prospective positions, or even within my current job, the teaching experience comes up a lot. It's something they want to know about. They are excited to hear that I think about teaching. I think about a lot of what I do in a framework of instruction. So it is valuable, I would say, in my experience.
Great, yeah, that's really helpful. And it's for me, at least, it's also a really good reminder that, yeah, a lot of the things that we attach so much like importance to in academia are not that meaningful ultimately.
Right, yeah.
So that is really nice. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, so I guess going back to the kind of question that was posed a long time ago, one thing that I'm kind of picking up from this that is really helpful is the way that so like I said, the way that you've learned about yourself through your time in grad school and figuring out how to apply your PhD in philosophy in this alt-ac career. And also, I lost my train of thought, but this brings me back to this question about like how this kind of way of thinking about like looking at yourself, looking at what you need, looking at what you're good at, looking at what works for you, right? How does this relate to your kind of general philosophical interests around looking at things like moral psychology or kind of development? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense. It is a challenging question to answer, I think, because first I'll have to answer a question you asked a while ago. I think about just talking a little bit about what drew me to some of the research I did and how it connects to how I see it connecting to my life now. And then I'll be able to talk about some of my current interests that grew out of my research while I was in school and that are, you know, a little bit stalled just because of life and the resources at the time. And that'll be the connection, because I am fascinated by questions having to do with particular human development. I like the general theories all the time, but I am far more interested in how the individual person experiences their life and learns how to navigate this world. And I like starting from the individual person, because that individual person is interacting with a bunch of stuff that we're all interacting with. Both these like broad social situations that we're occupying together, but also the way that concepts and, you know, like universals are delivered to us as something in particular that we then interact with, like whether or not we think, just for example, that there is something like truth with a capital T that somebody maybe could have access to, is an idea that most of us have had floating around. But I am interested in the way that the particular psychology interacts with that idea. So my research when I was in school, I got interested in ancient Greek philosophy primarily because of my Catholic heritage. I went to college. I was interested in philosophy because of my brothers. They're a bunch of nerds and they're older than me. So they were always having these just gnarly conversations that I couldn't understand. And I was so jealous and felt left out and desperate to prove myself to them that I could participate, you know. So what do? I go to school for philosophy to show them I can have philosophy conversations too. And then I get to school and I take a couple of philosophy classes and I realize like, oh, all of these like Catholic ideas that I had inherited from my Catholic upbringing these are just Plato and Aristotle's ideas. And I found that just the most important thing. I thought that was going to be my key to the universe. I was certain then that if I studied ancient Greek philosophy, I would have all of my answers. And so that's what I did. And then that's what I didn't get my answers, but I mean, I studied ancient Greek philosophy and I went to, and I do want to be clear, I enjoy it also as a field of philosophy. I do genuinely find it fun to swim in their soup, but I thought it was going to be my capital T truth, right? That's what I thought I was pursuing. And I thought I was making the wisest of choices. And I was right to do so. Other people were, why would you study modern philosophy or medieval? These guys are just doing more Plato and Aristotle. Anyway, I was so arrogant about it. So when I went to graduate school, I was really hoping to do something else. When I started, I was particularly late in undergrad. I got interested in feminism and phenomenology, but I didn't get a lot of opportunities to explore those topics when I was in undergrad. So I kind of went back to school thinking I could do more of that. But what I didn't expect was when you get back to school, everybody expects you to know what you want to do and have a path to a career. So I really quickly just went back to ancient philosophy because it was safe. It was clear to me. I already knew enough to be a successful graduate student in it, which was not fair, frankly, but I understand why that happened. And my own desire to be good and excellent meant that starting over in graduate school was terrifying. To start a new interest, I didn't know how to choose that course at that time. And so I stuck with Aristotle and philosophy. And I don't regret it by any means, because I have an amazing relationship with my dissertation director, who does Aristotle, and she does also phenomenology. I mean, mostly French phenomenology. So de Beauvoir in particular. I was able to find a lot of meaning working with her, and in graduate school is when I realized that ancient Greek philosophy has a certain way of trying to understand the human soul that resonates with me to my bones, it feels. And it's not just their theory of soul that resonates with me to my bones, it also is the foundation of even modern psychology. Freud, it was explicitly drawing on Plato's tripartite theory of the soul when he came up with the id, ego, and the superego. And our even more modern, our modernist psychology is like trying to fight this fight of telling people that we are a mind-body system. We are just one thing. Don't dominate one part of yourself with another part of yourself. You're not separate from yourself in this physical and spiritual sense. Like, you're just one thing. We got these parts, and we talk about these parts as though they're different parts, but they're just one thing. And that's, to me, that is exactly what Aristotle and Plato were saying with their tripart theory of the soul and their understanding of how your physical body is delivering information to your mind. It sounds really separated and divided. And I know that in the history of philosophy, we have picking apart that way of understanding soul, and we still do it. But modern psychology feels to me like it's trying to tell us, like, no, stop it though. Just stop it. Look, like, I know they've talked about it like they were different things, but they're just trying to understand the one thing. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I want to fight that fight too. I come at it from not just Aristotle and Plato and theories on the soul, but from my own experience with chronic pain, where, you're just trying to understand why your body hurts in a way that it hurts. And anybody's isolated explanation, it doesn't seem to fix it. And to be clear, like, plenty of pain is the result of an isolated incident or event or injury, right? But the thing that's nuts about chronic pain and certain chronic conditions is that they don't make a lot of sense in the Western model of medicine, where it's so divided from spirit, from soul, from psychology, from feelings, whatever it is you want to fill in that other part with. Mm-hmm. Just treat the body like it's a biological machine, which, sure, we're a biological machine, but we have like feelings though. So that's part of our biology. So there's this fixation I have with how ancient Greeks tried to understand human beings without the ability to like do MRIs and CAT scans, without the ability to like look on, like, use a microscope. Living in a time when it was very, very superstitious to cut up a body. Like, it was difficult to even have a body to look at and start to trace the gnarly way that our brain and central nervous system is networked, right? Like, cutting into human beings was that's not a thing we've done very long. Like, a lot of superstitions around that kind of behavior. So the way that they tried to do it was just like a lot of contemplation, like thinking about, what do I feel? What does it mean when I experience this sensation, but I have this thought? And how do I understand the relationship between perceptual experiences and my knowledge about the world? And then when I sort of took that interest seriously and went the direction of trying to figure out, all right, given an Aristotelian framework of human beings, how do we learn to be good? How do we learn to live well? I started with like a lot of people, I was interested in, what does Aristotle think being good or living well is? I was interested in those absolutes. And over time, it just became clearer and clearer that any absolute explanation is either inaccurate or unsatisfying, or just doesn't apply as universally as you're told it should. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of really interesting universal aspects to how human beings are attempting to figure out how they move through the world. That, like, Aristotle's, I think, is not wrong. That fundamentally, a lot of people think that's right. This isn't just Aristotle. Fundamentally, we're embodied, right? We take in information here at the locus of me and this thing that perceives the world. And the system that makes up me takes that information and does something with it. Sometimes I'm aware of it, sometimes I'm not. And eventually, right, I was like, okay, but then what does that mean for learning to be a good person or learning to live well? These are really high concepts for just talking about, like, seeing blue or touching fuzzy. So, the end result became finding in Aristotle something really interesting, I thought, which is that he has a notion of perception that is associative. And it's very phenomenological. So you have, not only do you see red or see round, right? Not only do you see colors and shapes, but you also will see an association. So to be clear, he doesn't think I don't think he thinks it's a cognitive process of thinking about, what is that red thing? Oh, it must be an apple. But instead, at the level of perception, at the immediacy of perception, you have this sort of associative perceptual experience where I see this object, and this object is, here's a red object. We can even see, like, I don't see this and have to think about what it is. Like anybody who studies phenomenology, right? I just see it's a cup, right? That there's an immediacy there. So for Aristotle, he actually has, in his theory of perception, a way of understanding how we can also maybe see the right action, so that you don't have to just like intellectualize every part of the way of being, especially when it comes to being like a morally good person or living a good life. That the goal is to get it into you so that you can navigate in the more authentic, natural sort of way, right? I think the purpose of doing phenomenology is understanding how you become the person body thing that you are, right? How you see the objects you see, right? And you break them down, and sometimes when you break them down, you're like, well, I definitely don't see that. Like, I'm not seeing bits of stuff and thinking about how it comes together. But you also see that you see things differently than others. Same information or whatever, right? Like, same perceptual field appears differently to different people. And that doesn't mean that it's not the same stuff, I don't think. I think it's just another sort of point where we see the difference between folks, that like you're a particular mind-body system that has come to be your age and your place having a particular trajectory. And so when you interact with a given field of vision, you're bringing everything with you there. And that is different than what everybody else is bringing with them there. And so we interact with the same stuff differently, which means that the question of how you educate people to be good, or how you as an adult work on yourself to be good or live a good life, is a hyper individual question. And that's why I think I get so fascinated then with like how the individual person is navigating their existence, because that's where all the work is. It's one thing to say, well, it takes practice and you got to like learn some basics about empathy, and I don't know, there are other general things you can say, or even just like being healthy is a good example because it's less like loaded with moral values that we're not talking about here. I'm just talking about being good as though that means something specific to anybody. But like, when it comes to health, right, the actual universal rules for health are really, really small, and they're not that interesting. It's like, drink more water, probably. You probably need more sleep too. Try to eat green foods at least sometimes. Don't don't cut a jalapeno and then rub your eyes. Like, it's like really, these rules are not that interesting, right? But then you get to the individual level and you're interacting with individual digestion, individual taste, and individual knowledge about food, and individual interest about preparing food, and culture about what foods might mean certain things. And then it becomes an interesting story, or an interesting project rather, of like, okay, you want to change the way you eat. Do not go to some health sage who's going to tell you to drink celery juice, but not diluted with water and not more than 20 minutes old, or it loses its secret powers. Like, that's garbage. I am sorry if anybody's on the celery juice trend right now, but it's garbage. Instead, it's just highly particular. And it's fascinating to me that it is so particular, even with real helpful universal truths like, yeah, try to drink more water, probably. Try to sleep more, probably. Definitely eat when you're hungry. Definitely eat when you're hungry. Also, eat if it makes you feel better too. That's okay. Like you can, if you need a treat, take a treat. Don't like deny yourself out of this idea that somebody else told you that the perfect number of calories is X number. Because your body is your body's your body. Like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that is how this idea of self-knowledge and taking time, especially in the last 5 years, to like think about, all right, if I want to do something different than what I'm doing, it turns out I can't listen to somebody else's advice. It's not quite the right way to say it, but I can't follow somebody else's plan. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I have to make my own plan because my plan is tailored to exactly what I do, what I can do, what I like to do, what I'll follow through with, how I'm motivated. You know, like I'm not motivated by it's good for me, turns out. Not really. I'm motivated a lot by, does it mean something to somebody else? Have I committed to it? Is it fun? You know, and it's not, in my case, it became extremely important to figure out what is the way forward from where I'm at. And nobody, it turns out, can tell me that.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with this kind of basic concept of like, you know, finding the mean, and like the mean varies from individuals, but I'd never made that connection before about to phenomenology, and how, right, just as, you know, phenomenology, and especially critical phenomenology, emphasizes the way that our individual kind of embodiment affects the way we perceive and interact with things. So too, it sounds like you're saying Aristotle thinks like this is the case too with moral, normative kind of perception as well. Yeah, that's really cool and interesting. And it's really inspiring to hear how you've taken this really cool area of philosophical research, and you've been able to apply it so concretely to your own life by kind of practicing what you preach. So yeah, that's really interesting. I want to talk about this more, but I also want to make sure that we have another question from the chat. So this question is, when people approach psychology as something more scientific, does it over-explain something that we still don't know too much about? For instance, does the ancient, more kind of mystical or spiritual model then offer us a more holistic way forward, in your view?
That's a really good question. I will do my best. / I will say what I think. I guess obviously I'll say what I think. I can't say what someone else thinks. But yeah, I do think that there can be a value. So first of all, yes, I do think that approaching psychology too scientifically can lead to either misunderstanding or ignoring extremely important parts that are actually like important parts to psychology. So, you know, if you treat depression only as a chemical imbalance, you can, you know, the sort of more obvious things that are a problem with that is you're not talking about environmental factors or economic factors or familial factors, which are extremely important to mental health and depression in particular. And in terms of getting better, whatever that might mean to somebody, having a relationship, having an awareness of how your environment is affecting your mental health is extremely important, not just the medication you're on. In my experience, medication was an essential first step to being able to do anything else. So I'm forever grateful that I was able to get a prescription when I had it. But there's this other thing that I think is really interesting about human beings. And mental illness is so fascinating because if you have a brain that likes to deliver up negative thoughts, for example. So my depression in particular was very good at finding the same kinds of stuff to throw at my brain, or throw at me, whatever. I try not to separate myself too much from my diseases, but like I would just be hanging out and my mental experience is being overloaded with thoughts of self-doubt and like worthlessness and a lot of not good enough-isms, just a lot of not good enough-isms. And in particular, a lot of comparativeness. So a lot of like particular people I'm seeing who are, I think, amazing. and they're doing everything exactly right, and I can't do that. And so what am I even trying to do here? So that's like, that was helped by medication. It was also impacted by my environment. Absolutely. Being in graduate school, you're just swimming in these lessons and these ideas of like, how much do you work? How much output do you have? How original are your ideas? How many famous philosophers are you meeting or whatever? And if you're not doing what you think is then being told is the right way to do it, it's very difficult to figure out how to feel like what you're doing is good. Mm-hmm. So the environment is providing me basically these thoughts that are harming me. But the part that I needed to learn to get over depression in any big meaningful sense, and I don't mean like to overcome the negative thinking, absolutely, I still have some of that from time to time, but like the idea that I can start working on accepting myself in a very robust way can be part of like therapy. But often when we approach psychology really scientifically, we forget about this stuff that gets caught up in like the woo-woo kind of attitude. It's like gets a bad rep to do affirmations, gets a really bad rep. And I understand why. It feels very silly. I feel silly when I do it, but I have literally learned like when I'm in a throw of anxiety, even when I'm on medication, it can happen. One of the nicest things I can do for myself is just like put my hand on my heart and start saying, I'm going through a tough time. I'm going through a tough time. My environment can't change. Not right now. I have to have this, whatever it is. This project, I have to finish it. In the case of my dissertation, it was just like I decided. I could have, of course, changed my environment, but I was not going to. Or like, you know, if you're in grief, you know, some of the worst of it was after my mom passed away. I can't change that environment. I can't change that environment. And again, I didn't go back on my antidepressants right after my mom passed away, but about 6 to 8 months later, or maybe it was almost a year later, I went back on antidepressants. And it's another example of like, yeah, okay, so that stopped crying. I stopped crying, but I wasn't like undepressed, you know? I was able to like, okay, I guess I'll go do my work now. I don't need to lay in bed. That's important. But I needed to do this other stuff. I needed to also include like our questioner asked, like this holistic part. And I don't mean that necessarily in the treat myself as a whole person and treat all of the parts of myself so much as I mean understanding that the state that I am experiencing right now is the result of a system that is 34 years old and full of stuff. And sometimes what comes up is like, oh, I was 10 and my brother left for college and he never came back and I'm mad at him. Right? But he was like 18. Like, of course, like, I'm not mad at him now. Like, obviously, I left for college too at 18. But like that feeling is deep in me. And it is okay that it's there. And it's okay that it shows up sometimes. And the more I can recognize this whole system, which is a system that has existed in this body over time through different hormonal phases, through different physical phases, through different psychological phases. When I can let all of that be true and present at once, I can just much more so understand like what I'm doing when I'm doing something. Mm-hmm. And why not. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have like negative thinking still. It just means that I'm better at like hearing it, if you will, and letting it say its piece, and being able to accept that there are dark parts of me, and to know that at the same time there's a lot of other parts of me, and not every day the dark part gets to be in charge, and less now with all of the work I've been doing. It's like again, prescriptions, the scientific part of psychology is extremely important. I don't want to be, but I just want to say it's like there are people who can't do the rest of the stuff, like for whatever reason, and And I don't mean, you don't have to do it all anyway. Also, the inner work speaks to different people differently. Mm-hmm. Some people don't benefit as much from it. I actually do think that that's true. And again, you're going to know more. You're going to know if the antidepressants aren't enough, or as just to keep saying it, this example, right? Like in my case, if the antidepressants just stop the crying and get you off your couch, that's really great. But the whole system have not changed. And that can be, an essential next step for a lot of people that deal with mental illness, is like just making space to start really exploring with how they will be able to treat themselves through tough times, so that you get to the other side of the tough time and you don't hate yourself or feel like a failure or feel like you've done it wrong. Mm-hmm. Because there's no wrong or right way to get through tough times. Like, it's just buckle up,
Yeah. No, that is really, interesting and helpful. And I think one of the kind of themes that I'm picking up on here is that, so of course, so one way that your research in like ancient Greek philosophy of soul, right, it's this focus on the fact that, things are different for every person. We're all going to have our own like particular way of relating to the world, and we need to take that into account. But then also, without dismissing this like, scientific side, right? Another thing that these kinds of more ancient theories seem to have in common, and my research, I do some ancient Greek stuff, especially ethics, and then also some classical Confucian. And I would say one similarity between those two is that they also emphasize the kind of reciprocity between the individual and the relationship in the community. Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned earlier that the way that the kind of Aristotelian tradition has been transmitted in Western philosophy, maybe there's too much of this like focus on reason and, the body as like competing, right? But it sounds like the way you're looking at it, it is this more holistic, like, so our emotions, our body, our mind or soul, and our environment all kind of interact with each other, and we can't just dismiss it or treat one part. Does that seem kind of in line with it?
Yeah, I think that is in line. That's definitely in line with how I understand ancient philosophy and how I draw relevance and meaning today from those theories. Mm-hmm. I do want to just, if it's unknown to anybody who is watching, it is still a very live debate, the extent to which Aristotle, I should phrase it this way. It is explicitly clear that he prioritizes reason above all the other things that are human. Mm-hmm. That is undeniable. He doesn't think it's an equal system. But the idea that he thinks that the reason part of us, or the rational part of our soul, is fundamentally separate from the rest of us, is a contended or a contentious point. It is clear on at least a couple of times in his text, he talks about it being separated or being more immortal than other parts, or what have you. And these comments are really the origin, as well as just the way that we prioritized and fetishized reason throughout the history of philosophy. But Aristotle definitely thinks reason is the best thing in the world, and he thinks that our rational component is the only part of us that is like divine. What is troubling about that is that doesn't actually mean what everyone thinks that it means. Meaning, it doesn't mean that he thinks that like this part of you has to be somehow king of the rest. The goal is, as a rational being, to really lean into that side of our lives. That is, for Aristotle, a very important difference between human beings and non-human beings. In the reading of Aristotle, it's always human beings versus other organic non-humans. But the reality is, what's interesting in Aristotle's schema is that human beings are a kind of thing that gets to be both divine and not divine. We don't get to be holy bodies rotating in the heavens. That's not our experience. It's not our life. We also don't get to be, the cat that just gets to like do exactly what its system tells it to do, and there's no weird little repression and neuroses resulting from it. Let's be clear. Some animals develop these sorts of behaviors out of a lot of maybe trauma or a lot of weird domestic situations. non-human animals are subject to neuroses too, but like in terms of thinking about like on the schema of beings for Aristotle, human beings operate in a very strange category of we are organic things that are living, but we have a little bit of the divine in us. And for Aristotle, everything tries to be divine. And by that, he means not just live forever, but be perfect. And he means that in like everything wants to be as complete and sort of fulfilled and actualized as possible. Everything that exists is trying to achieve that state. And in the attempt of trying to achieve this state of a perfect, complete actualization is trying to imitate divinity. It's just a bunch of identity statements there for Aristotle. Human beings are weird because we actually have like a little bit of the divine in us. So when we imitate divinity, we're also being it. So we do, on Aristotle's schema, we operate a strange little spot.
Interesting. Yeah, I would love to keep talking about this, and I think there's so much more to be said here. And of course, yeah, I had a lot more questions for you, but we're actually just past 2. So I will go ahead and start wrapping up. Thank you again so much, Jean, for being here. Thank you too to everyone who joined us in the live chat. / who just watched and didn't ask questions. This was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed the chance to hear more about both your experience and your research. Again, these public philosophy talks are sponsored by LUC MAP, Minorities in Philosophy. Renee will drop those if he hasn't already. Yes, those links in the chat. Please join us. This will be our last public philosophy talk for the month because we're going into finals or for the semester, but I hope to see you all again in August. And again, thank you so much, Jean, for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And I'll just say really quick, thank you, Gina and Renee, absolutely, for organizing and having such wonderful questions. And also thank you everyone who did ask questions in the chat, and anybody who just has questions now. I thank you for your time. Absolutely. I hope that this was interesting and even just like a little bit worthwhile for anybody. I'm hoping. I liked it. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. I thought it was great. Okay, but we'll go ahead and sign off now. So bye everyone. Thanks again.